a presentation screen?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, cool. So basically, I've got my screen on the left, and sometimes I will have to look there just to make sure that I'm on the correct page. Okay. So what is this presentation about? This is part of my wider research, and in this sort of separate bit, I try to create a standalone topical presentation on the subject of systems thinking applied to society and connected to some concrete examples, and try to link it to the Second Renaissance. This ties up a little bit with sense making in general and some of the blind spots. And then I'll dig into one of the blind spots and introduce this idea about interface versus implementation analogy that can help us uncover systemic corruptions or incoherences in the system. And then I'll talk about what's needed to effectively progress from awareness of something wrong to systemic change. So it is a bit about mystification. It's about sense making, emotional response without structure, systems thinking, and creating tension. So I'm just going to start with some examples. So let's imagine a familiar scenario. A company has come under fire for its bad customer services. And customers are complaining that they can't get the money back for the goods that hasn't been delivered. So there is a little bit of a scandal around it with articles written in the newspapers. And the CEO in the damage limitation exercise decides to give an interview to a TV station. So he says that the claims are not true and that in fact the company has a robust and fair refund process. Customers can either call the support number, speak to an assistant and receive their refund, or use a website to do so. So this is a case of a declared civic interface. It's a clearly stated specification of how the system is supposed to be working, and it sounds reasonable. And the CEO uttered everything confidently, so it sounds plausible as well, but it's something that cannot be verified.
Martin, just to say, was the slides meant to move? Because it's still on the first.
Sorry, thank you. That's
Button, and apologize for being late. I was engaged in a very heated conversation.
No worries.
But yes, thank you for starting at the first slide. Actually,
yeah. So I got the correct slide here, and basically the CEO has stated that the claims are rubbish and that there is a mechanism there in place to serve the customers and to basically for them to get the refunds for the goods they haven't received. So there is no way of testing that, but we can imagine this fictional scenario, and that is something that we all might have come across. So we call the number, and the number doesn't exist. And then what next? So what is basically, how would we react to that if the number that they stated exists is not there? Or we call the number and there is a recorded voice saying that they're too busy. And then we are basically running through this scenario where at every stage, sort of our expectations of progressing through the systems are met with some anomalies. So whether, and here it says office is closed, try another day, then basically a problem with the billing address. And eventually, there is not even a record of the communication with the customer services. So in this case, we have the interface. The spec has been declared. It's there in place, but the implementation is either dysfunctional, sabotaged, or maybe it's even designed specifically to wear the customer down. So how could different people make sense of what just happened? In terms of, is there an anomaly here? What kind of anomaly is there, and who to blame and what to do next? So we can probably all agree that different people, depending on their disposition, cognitive type, capacity for basically abstract thinking or assistive thinking, and whatever else makes us different from each other, would come up with their own very personal interpretation or even misinterpretation. And I've got a list of potential explanations that I've split into blind spots, layer of mystification, and consequences. So let me just see if I've got a slide for that. Okay. So somebody might say it's a one-off glitch. And the blind spot here is stochastic framing. All these blind spots are not actually official names of blind spot. They're kind of like coined in order to make sense, but I don't know if they've been identified or not, but they came out as a part of my research. So stochastic framing would be treating system failure as a fluke. It's an accident, not a deterministic breakdown. And then we have a layer of mystification, which is belief in the benevolence or competence of systems until proven otherwise. So we are giving them a benefit of doubt. Consequence is that no pressure to investigate pattern level failure, and there is no correction in the system. Then we've got this idea, or somebody's opinion, the explanation that the assistant is incompetent or lazy, and the person you speak to doesn't care, and he just passes you on. So blind spot is moral reductionism, which is reducing this systemic malfunction down to the level of an individual. Of someone's ethics or an effort. And the mystification layer here is personalization of blame that prevents pattern recognition. So if our first reaction is that if we see always a person, we don't see a system, we're going to fall prey to this particular mystification. Then we have it's bureaucracy, annoying but normal. Blind spot is resignation. Systems are inherently frustrating, so we don't question deeper reasons. Mystification layer, normalization or dysfunction. Then we have CEO lying, simulation acceptance denial, suspicion of the spokesperson, but not of the system model, because that is what we see in front of us, and that's how we basically relate ourselves to a problem, through somebody who is in front of us. And mystification layer, thinking the fix is a better CEO, not a better execution path. And or you might have this one, which is we need more regulation, which often comes up as well. Basically faith that it's actually something that can be simply fixed by introducing tighter rules or external constraints, rather than finding out what are the incentives and what are the powers that basically keep this system in place the way it is. Mystification layer, belief that policy statements ensure implementation. Let me just see if I've got the next one. Okay. So we are basically not even sure if there's an anomaly. But you can basically, some people can see the system claims to be deterministic, but is functionally non-deterministic. So that might be one way of looking at what's happened. And also there is no built-in testing mechanism to verify the path from interface to implementation. And this system's failure cannot be proven by us. It needs an expert who can get into the system to basically prove that there is disconnect between the interface and the implementation. And then we have these layers of obfuscation, which I've listed here, and I probably don't need to go into them. But basically, declared interface. There is a refund process, but it's not. It doesn't work. And then media amplification. CEO comes up as somebody who is quoted and interviewed as a person of credibility. So it's assumed that what they're saying is true. User experience mismatch is an interesting one because every customer might experience different things. Some customers might get a refund. Some customers, to different extent, will experience this resistance in the system. So there is no. It's not possible to uniformly come to a certain pattern of recognition of failure. Systemic invisibility means that there is no. There are no logs. There is no record of communication. No traceability. Should the system decide to obfuscate those. So, I mean, and the rest of it. So probably better if I continue. And then we have. Let me just see what's the next one. Okay, so I'm just going to jump on another example, and then I'll be done with those. So every day in central London, mass robbers on electric bikes steal mobile phones, and they, with pretty much with impunity, attack in broad daylight in the strictest center, and you know, it's often said that London is one of the most surveilled cities on the planet. So I actually went last Sunday to a conference at the UCL, and after the lectures, we all went to a social event at a local pub. And we were walking in a large group when a fully camouflaged rider on an electric bike, dressed all in black, approached from the back and managed to steal someone's phone, who was looking for directions. And that same person proceeded to snatch some more phones down the same street, literally like a serial attack, with 3 or 4 phones being stolen. So I looked it up later, and it looks like there are almost 100,000 of these mobiles, and they're getting stolen every year in London in the same manner. And back to the interfaces, the public is told that the safety is a priority, that the police has the tool and training to protect citizens, and that the crime will be deterred and punished. But when you press the button that the interface claims is fully functional, the system responds with a shrug, and you get a case number and a web link, and it looks like what I've pasted here. Basically, what they do is they reroute responsibility to the victims or to the public by giving you this advice how to keep safe. You should walk differently, or grip your phone tighter, avoid certain streets, lock your phone, or buy insurance. And also they advise you not to fight back. So this is not lack of ability, it's actually a misalignment of priorities, because the very same government claims that it can triangulate a terrorist in a cave in some remote place and intercept encrypted messages, launch drone strikes, and even predict like whether people will be radicalized using the AI. But they seem powerless against a teenager on an e-bike with a hoodie. So this is a contradiction, and contradictions are not just curious and accidental. They're really diagnostics. They're signs that the system is lying about its capabilities or its intention. And somewhere between this interface of stated intentionality and implementation integrity has failed. So let me just see what's next. Okay. So it's an interesting thing to think about the sequence of events that people might experience in this case. At first, there is a surprise because the brain doesn't predict that you would be attacked or something would be stolen from you. Then you have a fear that your personal safety suddenly feels negotiable, and the vulnerability becomes an issue, and you're really overwhelmed with a large number of micro decisions, which pose themselves in as little decision tree, like should I run or should I call the police? Should I try to take the phone back? Do I cancel my cards? And then we have a layer 2, which is basically the feeling of anger and narrative formation. And the emotions are really searching for direction, because there is huge amount of vagueness. It's almost kind of like a cognitive turmoil, or information overload. And you begin constructing cause and blame, asking yourself where were the police, or why is this happening in broad daylight? What kind of society would allow this to go on? And then we have a default narrative, which would be, this is just an individual or youth crime. Victim blaming is often comes up as you should be more careful with your phone. And these are all like real things. Like when I talk to people and bring this up, they would actually give me these answers. And there is no particular pattern or rule in which this might happen. So this is really the way that people process this very same information. Just in different cases, they come up with different things. And then we have here in layer 3 systemic blind spot. Basically, when we zoom out, this wasn't random. It wasn't just bad luck. It's part of the pattern. And then you may start noticing this as a systemic failure. The police know it happens. It's been going on for years now. Insurance companies adjust policies to make claims harder. Phone manufacturers remain quiet. So there is a kind of long list of blind spots here, or how you can go and unravel this tree of corruptive events. And then from this event we go to systems thinking, where we can think like a systems designer and say this is not a bug, it's a feature. Systems may be designed with strategic opacity, or there may be budget constraints, distributed unaccountability. No one is responsible because everyone is partially responsible. So there's a lot of stuff that comes under this. And finally, there is emotional coherence, which and political clarity. And most people don't stay in the diagnostic layer. The systems ensures that emotions flare, but they don't connect to structure. So most people remain at this level. And when I spoke to people after this event and I asked them like, so what do you think about this? And I said, well, I'll be more careful next time. Or somebody said like, I'm going to run after the thief. So it's just kind of everything is reactive rather than strategic, because it really doesn't land properly what's happened. There's huge amount of mystification about it. Having covered that, I'm going to introduce emotional incoherence blindspot. And this is something where it ties in a little bit with second renaissance, because we often talk about the phenomenon of polycrisis or metacrisis, in a sense that something is wrong with the world, broken and corrupt morally, structurally and socially. And while all this emotional heat seems to be good for cohering and expressing collective discontent, it's really a missing coherence. So these sentiments are not fake, and they're deeply experiential and shared as being feelings of betrayal or alienation, injustice, and what I often hear as well, confusion. People are simply confused by what's going on, and they can't articulate because it is not really open for articulation. And so these feelings are not grounded in structure, and beyond the initial resonance of wrongness, they become diffuse and self-defeating in a way. So there's an inadequacy of language and clear concept. So the anger has nowhere to go, really it just swirls, and it discharges usually in memes or cynicism and what I like to call performative outrage, where you basically just make a big fuss out of it, and everybody agrees, but that nothing gets done. So emotional incoherence mirrors systemic incoherence. And just as the problem of systemic incoherence is that institutions say one thing explicitly and do another, people also feel one thing and express another. And they lack a framework to process what they feel intuitively. And there is cost to this, because cost is the vagueness. And when critique is vague, it struggles to produce consequences. And you can't hold corruption accountable without defining which process is corrupt, or you can't dismantle a broken system without being able to name its components or understanding all the interdependencies, how it actually works. And you can't build coalitions on vibes alone. So in order to reclaim emotional coherence, you need to introduce systemic clarity, and basically they're both really important. So in order to do that, we treat everything in a society, or I like to think of anything in a society for the ease of analysis and for actionability and for appropriation of the blame as a system, because system has a certain vocabulary which really helps with it. So society can be visualized as a set of interconnected systems where virtually every social structure and institution can be seen as a set of components and their interdependencies, and they're all working together to achieve a certain function or purpose. So social system could be described like a little bit more precisely as an organized, rule-bound configuration of processes with roles, outcomes, and they're controlled or influenced by system owners and lived through by various stakeholders. So we have an idea who is responsible for what and who suffers, and there is a little bit of order in put in that experience. So, for example, it may be wrong to blame Donald Trump for what he's doing now, because he's been elected on the back of a decisive majority according to the democratic rules and processes that were established independently of him. So he just played the game by the rules, maybe not by the rules, but in any case, like, you can't directly blame him and at the same time support the system that allowed him to get into power. Or you can blame, but I'm just saying this is like a systemic way that you shouldn't really just have this reaction. So this creates an interesting rhetorical pivot from scapegoating rogue individuals to really interrogating the systems and its owners, which is harder to dismiss, and that's the whole point. And then I'm going to move on to interface versus implementation analogy. So I started with introducing society as a system, and then I find that it's actually really useful to use the analogy present in the paradigm of the software design. So modern systems increasingly present themselves as user interfaces, and they're clean and they're labeled and interactive as well. So whatever we do in the society, whether it's a website, but any actually interaction whatsoever, in a way can be seen as accessing and dealing with an interface. There are certain buttons to press, whether they're really buttons to press or not. So in this metaphor, the explicit specification of a system is like an interface. It tells you press this button to report violation or to submit a form. There is also something called implicit specification, which actually is what the system does. So by comparing these two, you can say that there is a misalignment. And that is basically where the contradiction and incoherence lies. So when you press the button and nothing happens, basically you have the appearance of functionality, because you might even have some sort of response from the interface, whether it's like somebody tells you something or you actually get some sort of thing on the screen. But the actual implementation is obscured, and you can't verify whether the backend ever responded. It's kind of like a really weird thing. That basically you need to have this trust that the system will work, because you don't have a clear path of escalation. It seems like if the interface doesn't work, then it doesn't work, because the escalation is also part of the interface. But there's a lot of good faith, and we have trust in the system, and that's why we don't keep on questioning that. And then this is basically the core of institutional incoherence, that the system appears coherent and interactive on the surface, but it does not function as described, or functions differently, depending who is interacting with it, or it delegates functionality further to some other opaque systems. So basically, system works as a black box, and there is a verification asymmetry. We cannot we cannot basically verify what's going on at all. And then I've got some of the software concepts which have direct social analogy, and you can go through that, and I'm just going to continue. So why it matters that we use this analogy is because it simplifies the complexity. It allows people with systems fluency and systems thinking to instantly see failures as bugs, not mysteries, because everything is inherently mystified by the system. It clarifies accountability, because there are people who are responsible for systems, and there are clearly defined responsibilities with the system. And it erodes legitimacy of facades. So you don't trust anymore just because you see it stated somewhere, because that's not the whole story. And then I'm going to move on to tension playbook, and I might not have a slide for that. So every social system operates with a story about itself. And this story is not just branding or political rhetoric. It's often something pretty formal, whether it's embedded in law, whether it's architecturally drawn. There is a workflow and a culture behind it. So it includes things like mission statements, policy documents, and public messaging. And there are narratives behind these things which are widely accepted. So again, this is what we call explicit specification, what the system claims and promises that it stands for, and what its designers and operators say it's meant to do. But again, systems have implicit specification, what they functionally accomplish, regardless of what they claim. And that implicit logic is observable in pattern of behavior, distribution of outcomes, incentives, and the lived experiences of those who pass through or are shaped by the system. So people who, in that case, people who have encountered bad customer experience, they have very real world experience of that system. So no amount of mudding water will actually change it for them, because it's very, very specific what they've lived through. And the thing is that all systems must present themselves as coherent to maintain legitimacy. So coherence means that there is an alignment between purpose, structure, and outcome. But when implicit functions conflict with explicit purposes, the system becomes ideologically split, still declaring one thing while doing another. And that's when we enter the territory of this systemic incoherence. So when a system's explicit ideals are persistently contradicted by its lived realities, it creates dissonance, and eventually it can become a pressure point that destabilizes the system's legitimacy. Let me just see if I've got something after this. So I've got this idea of Spec Drift Dialogues, which is a tool that would, or a process that would allow people to surface these incoherences. And it's a scenario-based inquiry tool, and it poses hypothetical situations to key stakeholders, which might be politicians, lawyers, economists, and philosophers, and then compare their interpretations against the system's stated intent and executional reality. So it can help us reveal where assumptions break, where system behavior contradicts intent, and where stakeholders' answers start to diverge. So we have stated system claim, hypothetical case, stakeholder inquiry panel, and execution tree comparison. Another example, we have stated system claim that cycling is prohibited in this park to ensure that pedestrians are safe and preserve a peaceful environment. And then hypothetical case scenario is you're walking through the park and a cyclist suddenly whizzes past you at speed, swerving between pedestrians, and you're startled, you have a child or a dog and pull it out of the way, and you point at the sign which clearly says no cycling, and the cyclist shouts back, it's free country, and keeps going. So you report the incident to a nearby park warden, and he says, we're not really allowed to stop them, there's too many of them, we can't chase them. And you contact the police, and they log it, but that's not their priority. And days later, you return to the park and cyclists are still speeding through. And then when we give this scenario with the initial stated claim to different people to have a little bit of an inquiry panel, we're going to ask the lawyer, is this rule enforceable? What mechanisms exist to uphold it? And he might say that there is no enforcement protocol tied to it. And so this prohibition is procedurally hollow. Politician might say that the sign signals council's commitment to pedestrian safety, but it's only symbolic governance. Philosopher might say it creates false sense of security through social gaslighting, and so on. So basically, we don't have these execution trees, decision trees, which is almost kind of like user manuals for people in the society to have to know what to do in order to navigate the complexities of the society. And then I work on like other things, but I've just picked this bit in order to present a little bit of what I'm working on. So I'm happy to take questions now or hear your feedback.
I just want to say, start by saying, wow, lovely, brilliant. I mean, yes, go for it. I want to see this happening. And I really like the way in which you've used the kind of set out the examples and used the kind of systemic connections and everything. But I'll let somebody else have a feedback.
Yeah, See, I'll say a few words real quick. What stood out for me? I thought that was lots of amazing, interesting points. Yeah, really nice. I was curious just generally how you like to look into like the primary sources that you use. Like what kind of do you tend to go on like certain like media websites or like places like Reddit even or more like informal yeah, I'm curious like where you get kind of your information for some of these things. Um, but I guess generally speaking, I would agree that there's no real way to talk about the system as a whole in a lot of these cases. And one of the things that you pointed out, which I thought was really a good way of putting it, is that the anger just swirls and it kind of just like gets pushed back on other people, and it just becomes yeah, just a situation of microaggressions against each other. And instead of um I find that to be especially more so true in the US than a place like Spain, for example. But it kind of gets yeah, like embodied in the way you just go about your daily life, where this the anger just kind of swirls back and forth. Um so yeah, I really like that really piece. But yeah, I'm curious about the sources that you use.
With regards to the idea itself, I always have I notice inconsistencies in the system, and that bugs me because I think it should be easy for everyone to see through them, and I start basically searching if anyone else has done any research in that direction and try to build a picture. But what I normally do is I go to GPT, sorry, the AI, and then I ask who are the people, who are the researchers who have done any research in particular topics. And it gives you like a large number of people to start with, and then you slowly weed them out by asking for summaries of their research into a particular thing. So I do find it's probably 70% of them are useless, in my opinion. And obviously, I cannot read all the books, so I have to go and look for the papers on the internet. But this particular thing with systems thinking is part of what I've been doing in my life as a software engineer. So I just use that analogy, and I didn't find anyone else using it in that sense. Um, and I needed a lever to basically create attention, and the only way to do it is by some sort of obvious and objective comparison. And this implicit explicit interface or specification really filled that slot. So hope that answers.
Yeah, I just noted, I mean, I have a friend that does VSM and he is always talking about VSM all the time. And, I think some of these things could well be usefully analyzed in those terms. And the other thing that comes to me, I'm not a software engineer. I've only done amateur programming and never done it properly. But I have heard a lot about people, like designing the tests first when they do software. And hey, why don't people do that with social systems as well? Like, yeah, that would be helpful.
Yeah, that's really interesting as well, because there is an insistence on a contract when it comes to systems, and why it's important is because of the exceptions. So the the thing that you don't want in software design, or I suppose in any sort of design, is that your application encounters some sort of error that has not been anticipated. So for example, you've got as a part of the interface specified what type of input and what type of output will a certain function receive. So you cannot pass different type of input and you cannot receive different type of output because it has been formalized in a shape of a contract. So interface is a contract. And that doesn't stop some other errors creeping in, some functional errors, computational errors, but at least it won't just do this and explode in your face. Because in terms of structure needed for it to operate, everything has been satisfied. But what I'm actually working here, as I haven't shown that because it's part of a wider project, is the idea that you can debug social systems as well and you can test them. So you can put a testing harness because some of these buttons, the most important buttons, let's say like a nuclear button, the one where you launch your nuclear weapons, are never ever invoked, or a lot to do with stopping democratically elected leaders becoming autocrats, for example. So you've got a lot of these things that can't be tested, and we rely on the fact that somebody will be impeached and they will be stopped because there are checks and balances. But that is just nonsense because it's never been tested. And nobody can even tell you to what extent they have confidence that it works. So almost like our society lacks this golden source of knowledge. There is no reference where you can turn to in order to get any deterministic answers. So what you use lawyers, for example, to discover the workings of the world, but they will always distance themselves and they'll say, in my opinion. So it's never deterministic. And there is this myth of complexity of social system which doesn't lend itself for deterministic outcomes. And I think it's nonsense. And I think it's part of the mystification of the systems.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to add that it seems like more people are kind of like waking up also to the idea that there's more of like yeah, bugs at like a more fundamental level, I guess. Um Sorry, I just want to check the chat really quick. But yeah, it seems like there's more people that are kind of at least from what I've seen online and even, including like social media feeds that that I frequent. There's a bit more of like a sense that there's these, yeah, foundational bugs, I guess. But it still feels like so much of it comes down to like dialogue and how it's discussed. It feels like social media is kind of just a a way to have that anger just or frustration, I think, keep swirling. So I think ways to talk about it is really, really important. So I like the framing. But it still kind of just it feels so hard to to do these things, to talk about them in a more meaningful way. Whatever the quote unquote system is. It seems, yeah, like for example, because if you're living in like a just a suburban US town and you kind of feel the frustration of your daily life and it's kind of really weighing down on you. It's kind of too, you don't even know where to start really. I feel like it's how do you make sense of it? Like how do you make sense of the whole? It feels impossible to make sense of the whole. So I don't know. I just think that's just a general situation of making sense of quote unquote the whole.
Can I kind of Sorry, go ahead, Martin.
No, I was just going to say, Matthew, if you remember, like Bourdieu was also struggling with that problem, and he came up with the idea or notion that we need a philosopher king, because regardless of your intelligence or your qualifications, most people cannot handle it, this complexity and mystification in a satisfactory way. And he reckons it's a specific type of capacity, and maybe we need to be schooling, we need to be creating this class of people who would be able to make sense of it. And I think philosopher king, obviously, it's an idealistic notion, but I think it's probably appropriate concept.
Interesting. I mean, I wanted to bring in the issue of predictability as a complex issue, because, you know, obviously being fully aware that the more complex the system is, that it tends to go out of predictability, but at the same time that people for their daily lives rely on quite a large amount of predictability, and when there's not enough predictability there, well, you know, people can freak out and just not function. And so I feel there's always this sort of tension between how complex can we make the system to be without exceeding, that's almost like a donut model again, without exceeding the bounds of human manageability in terms of predictability, in terms of understandability, in terms of transparency, and lots of the things which you were talking about earlier. So I think I just wanted to kind of bring that up as a fundamental issue, in complex society.
I think that that it can go the other way. Actually, you can make systems much simpler, but at the same time you can't, because of the various limitations and restrictions you got. And I'm going to use a totally inappropriate example for this, and I'm not even sure whether it's accurate or not, but please forgive me, because I just want to amplify the idea of it. So let's say that in, I don't know, Saudi Arabia, if you steal something, they would chop your hand off. Like, you could theoretically
not anymore, but yeah.
No, but I'm just like literally theoretical, and I only said
not defending. I have great reservations against what is being like the cultural shift, even the cultural shift that is happening in Saudi. It's but that's for another time. Yeah, continue, please.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, basically, if you have like such a severe paradigm, you could, in a way, get rid of a lot of complexity around it. I'm not saying that's the right way. I'm just saying that theoretically, you don't have to go into increased complexity to cater for everything. You can actually reduce complexity to insist on people or institution, everything else, working in the spirit of the motivation and specification. So that is, again, like a paradigm shift, as opposed to enforcing. You make people think that they should work in the spirit of something.
Just like to bring in more of Naima's points in the chat. I think they're great points, and I want to hear more about that.
But I don't know if the example you have given like holds accuracy to complexity and simplifying of systems, since like the example you've given is not based on man-made input or like reaching conscious. It's Sharia law, which means like God said it, we executed. So it's not a simplification of the system, it's bypassing the whole system.
Yeah, I agree. Bypassing, you delete the system.
Yeah, delete the system, God, a human being, anyone, like one-man show, and
That's much simpler.
much simpler. Too simple.
I'm not making any proposals. We're just theorizing about that you don't always have to, just like growth, personal growth doesn't necessarily have to be
Yeah.
always in a positive direction. You can regress as well in the same way. Yeah, this kind of ever-growing complexification doesn't necessarily need to go in that direction. It's not like an error of that. You can decide to go the other way.
And I want to sort of also chime in with the idea that people have this natural tendency, when things get too complex, people have a natural tendency to want things to go back to something which is simpler. And I mean, you're seeing that all around at the moment. To simplify is used to make it very, very simple and to absorb and to take on the simple narrative which is sold to you by some power that is some established order, to which often works in the kind of way which you're indicating, Naima, to deflect the whole thing.
Yeah, but what you're saying basically is a dialectical process and progression of history and everything around us. Like if you're talking between the shift between complexity and then simplicity of the system, and people wanting exactly the complete opposite of what happened before it to reach a synthesis. So it's the natural progression of things. So maybe like this pulsation between what's complex and simple is what allows a forward motion in a sense, a progress in a sense, if we can call it progress.
Again, it's sorry.
And it's also maybe it's also like the complexification of the system and the growing ability of the individuals in the system to actually cope with that complexity. Sorry.
So you're talking about it in a container sense, sort of sense.
No, let somebody else chip in.
Yeah, and I just want to say that there also in software design there is something called code smell, and basically what happens is when you come across problems, you don't actually fix the core of the problem itself, but you create something to temporarily and in specific situations solve the outcome of bad code, and eventually you start you get used to making shortcuts rather than addressing, and then the whole structure becomes so rotten, and complexity, in my opinion, can also be, as over complexity can be a sign of the rot in the system.
Yeah, like the example you gave is very accurate, and it's in microcosm, but it can apply to anything. Like I always have this practice: if the code is too much bugged, then like start all over instead of just fixing it, patching it all together, because it gets to a point where you have to continue with the same mindset and the same coding practices if going forward, and it will keep creating the same problems in a sense. And this is what's wrong in current systems, whether it's politically, economically, whatever governance system that's being applied. Like it's this patching of it. It's yeah. So
I have a small point. I missed some bits because my internet was quite unstable, so I may have. I think for me, I struggle to understand this person. Not struggle to understand it. I understand it, but I lose the thread of it. Just based on the way that I know that my brain processes things, which for me is really interesting to try and like stay with it in a systems, like really systematic approach. But I was sitting with wondering if, how to explain what my question is. If the individuals that have the capacities to
Lauren, can you hear us?
Looks like Lauren's frozen.
Frozen.
Oh, I was just looking forward to that.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Keeping us on edge.
She'll hop back in.
But I feel I could explain this to anyone. I don't feel like this is some esoteric knowledge
No.
whatsoever. I think this is like
Agree.
really simple, but just you need to find the right angle to it approached. So.
Going kind of, sorry, were you gonna say something, Warren? Kind of just like based on what we were saying, there's like an interesting tension where, on the one hand, and this is, I feel this more in the US than over here in Spain, but on the one hand, there is a sense that the quote unquote system or way of doing things doesn't work anymore, or it's kind of is not able to satisfy people's wants and needs. And on the other hand, there is still a belief in the way that it's done. It's so because there's not really a way to imagine going out of it or doing something else. So it's like on the one hand, everyone knows it's not working. On the other hand, there's still an implicit belief because you kind of still have to use it and be a part of it. And like talk the way that people talk and solve problems the way that people solve problems, etc.
Yeah, I'd really like, or maybe it would be interesting to have a chat or talk about to analyze what Donald Trump is doing at the moment, because he's messing up with the system in unprecedented manner. He's literally taking apart the whole structure, and I believe that he or his advisors have a deep knowledge of how systems work, because he's not just taking heads off. He's really trying to completely restructure everything to suit his goals, and it's an interesting sociological experiment, but I have never heard anyone talking about that.
I think Jijik talked about it. I'm trying to find like his yeah, I'll find it and I'll send it to you.
Check, you're saying, Martin, that you think it is a deliberately carefully orchestrated thing and not just he's stupid. Right. Interesting.
No, it seems to me that he's doing really clever stuff. Not him personally, but just the stuff that happens is incredibly smart, and he seems to be outwitting everyone, left, right, and center. At the moment, there's a window of opportunity for that, and in a year's time, people will have got used to his way of dismantling things. But at the moment, he's extremely effective at what he's doing, and we should really be scared, like most people are. But I think most people do not quite understand to what extent he's changing everything. You want to try again, Lauren?
I don't know where I got to before my internet dropped. It's so frustrating today. Where did people hear up to?
I think best to start again is probably most helpful.
Okay, so what I was trying to ask was whether the personality types, individuals with certain abilities, cognitive functioning to process and approach systems change and innovative systems development and innovative systems development, whether that will just continue to ultimately create the same hiccups, problems based on the fact that the brain that is needed to construct something like that will not be able to integrate the other aspects that could be useful, and then like it's a question. I don't know if I'm really wording this very well. Sorry, I got completely thrown. But like, are we stuck in a bind, I guess, is kind of what I'm asking, in the sense that we need the thinking of this type to function in this way, and does that somehow override, in essence, the other related aspects that we sense as needing to be integrated? And then another thought I had was just, if we were able to sort of approach it from this perspective, what then becomes innovative? Like, where does innovation move to? How does that sort of position itself? So yeah, they were kind of things that I was thinking.
Well, it's a very difficult question, the one that you asked. I mean, it's a very good question, but it's not an easy one to answer. But basically, nothing can be off the table is what I would like to suggest. So, for example, I mentioned that we have Donald Trump and whatever we have, and we have these institutions, which is United Nations, or we have European Union. And there are these overarching institutions which are almost a part of our identity and what we stand for in terms of our values, etc., etc. But we can't be wedded to these rigid structures because they have almost outstayed their usability, and we must change because they're not fit for purpose anymore, for example, or they're so corrupt that they need to be dismantled. There's a lot of stuff going on in the world, and I always imagine things like trains. So if you're on a train that slows down and you see a train going faster, you have an option to move to another train, or to stay on your train for whatever reason. And some people who are really locked in their way of thinking tend to stick with what they've got no matter what. I'm not sure if I'm making any sense, but yeah.
I see that as just a cognitive thing, like, we all invest in understanding the system as we see it, and it's always more difficult to change. So that goes with the kind of dictum that, people don't change unless there's pain, basically. And that's unfortunate.
Yeah, and to go into the point a little bit, every now and then people use these kinds of like metaphors, which I really like, actually, which are more like biological metaphors, to consider, I guess, social relations or things like that. But it's kind of like an endosymbiotic thing, where it's like you are the system, you're part of the system, like who you are as a person is the system. I guess it's a bit like a yin and yang sort of situation. But I think it's hard to even realize that, or to yeah, come to terms with that, or with the possibility of a different system.
Yeah, Lauren, maybe if you post some of your question, because I'd like to kind of think about it. It seems like a complex question that maybe has some sort of useful answer.
So I can post it in the forum.
Yeah, can we have a forum on today's session? That would be really interesting. A forum topic on this session would be great.
Yeah, I can publish the call, and then when it's live, I'll link it into the forum topic as well,
Cool.
so people can reference it.
Nice. I mean, I keep on coming back to the human information processing side of this, because that's where I've thought most, and which I think in recent years has included the psychological as well as the sort of like logical, and we definitely need, as far as I can see, there is a need to think quite deeply about how to address the issues in terms of, I mean, you know, the idea that was coming up, but your idea, Martin, about, yeah, maybe a philosopher ruling class, you know, but that's another oligarchy, and isn't that what we're kind of saying is happening at the moment? Oh dear. I mean, you know, is there a kind of tech bro, you know, with Musk and what's his name, Peter Thiel, and various other people who do seem to be quite smart. Whether they really are smart, I don't know. But they're not. But they don't have. But they haven't got the right mindset. They haven't got the right attitude about working for everybody's good. So that's going to be bad, isn't it? So how do we do that?
Yeah, and I just mentioned it because Bourdieu mentioned it, but I didn't mean I didn't think of them to be ruling. I just thought of them as a specific advisory in specific advisory roles, because they can definitely see something that normal people can't, regardless of their intelligence. It just, this manipulation and mystification is not obvious and transparent to everyone for whatever reason.
I sense as well, and maybe this is like a limiting belief or something, but that ability to sense into that level of complexity would often come at a cost of something else. Like, to be really, you know, even if you look at it from, well, the way I am considering it, if I want to be an amazing athlete, that's world champion level, that's likely to come at a cost of a solid social life, or an ability to enjoy most foods and drinks that other people come at. So I'm just wondering if there's also this an offset in that sense that isn't changeable without a loss in some way. I'm not sure.
What if it's intuitive skill? And I believe actually it is.
Wonder if it'd be interesting to like consider it in like in terms of, I'm not necessarily suggesting this, but like more of a disciplinary way of thinking about the system or the whole, if that would be an interesting way to consider it. But yeah, no, I don't know. It's a good point, Lauren, because personally, and I think anyone who tries to consider things or kind of try and look at the complexity of whatever it is, it can, it doesn't exactly align with the values that the world wants out of you in a lot of cases. Like it doesn't. And actually, I'm just gonna share this in the chat really quick if anyone wants to take a quick look. But yeah, I don't think it's something that I'm not sure if you guys have ever heard of capitalist realism from Mark Fisher. But I guess it's just this idea that we tend to view the world in terms of like capital is the most real thing, or kind of just like capitalism is, I guess it's like the common sense, or just the way the world is. And capitalism, I guess, or that kind of worldview doesn't really value considering considering the whole. So it would be, it's hard to get a job, I guess, is one way to put it too. But I, if anyone would be interested, I sort of touched on these themes a little bit in that Substack post.
Just on Naima's, just a word in what Naima just shared around the first sentence. I'll just say it so that on the recording it's useful. So Trump deconstructs a system through chaos and ego, and there's more to it than that for everyone else. But it brings me back to the quote that, like, you have to have chaos to birth a star. Like, chaos is not always necessarily maybe it's semantics of the word, but there is often actually a very useful energy in chaos. Like, I can't think of an example, but yeah, it just made me think of.
Yeah, you're exactly thinking in the same lane that I'm thinking. Like, I don't agree with whatever Trump is doing, but he is the tower moment that would enable change and rebirth and all of this that is happening. So in a progressive, like in a progression sense, his role is essential, I think, in history progression. He would be, yeah, like he's like Hitler, you know, like it's a defining moment in history where shit hits the fan, and then people say, like, okay, listen, we have to do something about it because this is gonna lead to extinction in a sense. You understand? So yeah, it's the same as Hegel looked at Napoleon. Like he in the context of thing, he declared him as a hero, although he was like invading Germany. So in the bigger arc of, or in the fuller arc, like I think Trump is a necessary part of the process, but not necessarily that I agree with his values and the way he functions in a sense, but necessary part of the fuller arc.
I long for a world where we don't need Trump in order to actually move on. That would be really nice.
Yeah. But it's all in cycles, like in the bigger like picture of things, I think. Like, how can you have rebirth? How can you create progress as everything is flat and nice and fluffy and boring?
By accepting death as part of life, because I've heard this coming up a lot recently, actually, in people that are thinking that way. Accepting death as part of life, accepting, you know, and actually positively turning into, hey, this has got to change because it's, you know, and that needs a different mindset. It does need a different mindset, and that's maybe where we need to go.
Maybe people always associate like words like power and death with like negative connotations because right now within current systems they are only seeing the downside or the disadvantage of it. Like when you say power, you are seeing inequality. When you say death, you are seeing like violence in a way. But it shouldn't be the paradigm in a sense. Like power is a beautiful thing. It's and death is a beautiful thing if it's about surrender, if it's about acceptance. Like and this is, I think, what we should be framing our next paradigm shift, like what we are aiming at, in a way that these historical connotations associated to certain natural cycles of things are stripped away from their violent or like unequal and inclusive context in a way. So maybe the change of language would be, or change of definitions would be very useful.
I also think that we need some disruption always, in the sense that I think that it would be very ironically very disruptive to humanity for there to be this kind of level of peace. My personal perspective, like a spiritual perspective, is that we come here to learn things. So if there was this sort of And I don't think we will get to like a true point of equilibrium. And I think that this drive and need and desire for like growth and improvement is the thing that pulls us towards missions and purpose, but is also not always helpful because of that pull. And equally, without it, we would automatically choose to become self-destructive by nature, based on the fact that I think on some really deep level, we are always playing with this idea that we will die. So we are always testing out and trying to, in some ways, see what that evokes in us through an everyday existence, which maybe I've gone off on a tangent from that. And I don't think it's a cognitive like choice. I don't think it's something we are necessarily aware of. And I can only speak from that conclusion based on my own personality and my natural inclinations that I've observed. But when things are too balanced for me, I will look to disrupt it. And when things are very disruptive, I will now channel that energy to seek balance. And there's this constant dance and trying to minimize it so that the line is more like this, as opposed to like this. For me, when I was younger, is the way that I can now kind of enjoy the dance between the two polarities.
Yeah, I love what you said, because I think Simon shared with me like a couple of days ago one video that talks about how people usually like cast themselves in a role of like the dominant part or the like victim part, like the exertion of and how there is like a much subtler dynamic, like all people need the both end of like you have sometimes to be in a surrender role, and sometimes you have to be in a like dominant role, in a sense that it's the give and take of thing, and it can be done interrelationally, and it can also be done within like the person within his himself and the real self and the higher self, in a sense. So it's quite essential for us, like in the human experience, I think. And I don't know what happened throughout our timeline, that we like we're trying to banish this narrative, our need to be on both end of the energy spectrum.
As a separate thing, something that came up on the forum recently as well is about Bernardo Kastrup. He's the objective idealist, and he's got this idea, and he's actually quite good in some sense, but he's got this idea of panpsychism or whatever it is, and he says that basically our brain is simply individuating this consciousness, and when we fall asleep, we kind of disassociate, and exactly the same thing happens when we die, and our soul or our number identity goes back into the pool and gets kind of recycled. So also this idea what we have about death, we have zero certainty what happens after we die, literally. Like makes no sense to show any confidence in terms of thinking we're going to die in some sort of very unpleasant way and not just like falling asleep.
In relation to like some hypnotherapists that focus on regression, past life, but in between lives, there's been sort of a consistency of accounts in terms of the individuals that have been recorded for the research, like the way that a soul transitions from a physical body and back into source, so to speak, which is really interesting, like the sense of that and the disruption that some souls can have based on the perceived experience and things like that. And it's really interesting to try to comprehend that when you are like physically here. And it kind of has for me been comforting and also very confronting, because it's like, oh, okay, I'm going to kind of basically return to the light, and everyone's describing this light as so joyful and free and peaceful, and you know, the time is not really a thing there, and then at the same time, I'm like, yeah, but I like being me. I don't want to leave and go to the light. Like, I want to be here. So, and you know, and then it's like, oh, and when, if I could choose when I go to the light, when would that be? And it really brings up really interesting, for me, really interesting, I don't know, just like thoughts, presencing the actual reality of their, and maybe it's not true, maybe that is some soul's experience, you know, maybe that, but presencing that that could be a truth of what is experienced. And then how do I feel about that being an experience my essence will have, and which part of that is, like, I don't know, it's just, it brings up lots of complexities anyway, just as the sort of sharing we don't kind of know what will happen after death. It's like one aspect of.
I also want to acknowledge like the weaving that has been happening throughout all of this session, in a sense that we started by looking as systems, as foreign bodies that does not live inside of us, as if like we've outcasted them, like they are a problem that is outside our like cognitive and conscious behavior. And we started going deeper and deeper until like we were talking about the duality of things and the complexity of things within our own self and in our own systems. And we're trying to more figure it out and have a conversation about it. And in the bigger like realm of the second renaissance, I think like this is what we are aiming at, like this entanglement between how us and the world, like what is happening inside of us, is being mirrored by institutions, by political systems, by economical systems. And yeah, I would love like for this duality to have a space for this kind of mind and body duality in the conversations within the research group. Like if we can be conscious and more intentional about it.
Yeah, I love that, and I love this idea. I mean, it's partly, to me, it's as above, so below, and you know, the correspondence of things, and how if we just when we externalize things and refuse to see the bit in us that's actually there, then we've lost out on our agency. We've lost out on our potential of doing something about it, and I think that's a real shame, because it's almost like whatever happens, there's always something that we can do about it, even if it's only little. Not taking responsibility for it, not blaming ourselves for it, but just saying that we can care about this in a positive way and do something and have agency. Really important. I better go and feed the cat.
Yeah. I'll just say one thing. I just put it in the chat, but because I know I often pull things off into a slightly different direction to try and bring it back to the sort of initial point with where we've moved to. And thank you so much, Naima, for the sort of summarizing and pulling it together. I think the question that is interesting for me is like how or could or should we include this essence of disruption or even destruction in some small way consciously into the systems that we're creating, so that we allow for a flux which creates the polarity that maybe we are energetically intentionally trying to pull through.
Yes.
Your questions are really hard today.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I really can't think of how it just at the moment just beyond me.
Welcome to my world, Martin. I think this is why I avoid like a lot of like structural systems related conversations, because my brain isn't able to sort of sit with it in that way.
I support Lauren. Like most of the time, it's the case that yeah, some people, when they talk too much rationally and structurally, it's hard for everybody to embrace what they're talking. It's like gibberish. And if we can find a way to bridge that, like for people who go about knowledge in a different capacity and in a different pathway, that would be beautiful.
And I'm not sure if it's related, but I just wanted to mention before going that, you know, what you were saying earlier, Naima, about systems like that seek their own preservation fundamentally, they're designed to preserve themselves. How do we design systems that are not designed to preserve themselves? That's a fascinating challenge. We'd love to engage with
Maybe
It's
that.
called corruption, systemic corruption.
maybe we can have a session around it. Like not all sessions have to be about something that we know, but maybe some sessions have to be about things that like it would start with a question. Everybody
Cool.
will have their own
absolutely.
will have their own research, will have their own in their own like mindset of doing research. Like not everybody is obligated to go and find papers, but like some would go find papers, some would go like sense it, some would go like you know, and then we bring it all together and discuss. Like maybe this is what should the next session should be about. Like how do you create systems that are not innately corrupt or like progress towards corruption in a sense. Nice.
Splendid. Good note to finish on. Thank you.
Okay, if everyone's happy, we can end the meeting. Thank you very much, Martin.
Thank you very much for listening.
I think this one was one of the best flows in the research group since I started. I don't know before, but I felt the conversation flowing and the energy is flowing in a much better way than ever. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, it was nice.
Good.
See you guys.
Yeah.
See you.
Enjoy the holiday if you have a break.
And do get people to volunteer for next week, since I will probably be at VUB talking to Orion and people.
Right.
See you, everybody.
Great.
See you guys.
Bye-bye.